I understand the urgency. I'll begin. The voice coming through the static-laced holoscreen trembled not with fear exactly, but with the strange weight of what had just unfolded. The being speaking appeared worn, its uniform disheveled, eyes dim from sleepless hours. Whether the unease came from addressing the highest echelon of the Galactic Concord's Defense Tribunal, or from the events that had just transpired, it wasn't clear. The chamber housing the tribunal was not extravagant. Despite its reputation for handling matters that shook entire star clusters, it was small, even austere. The ceiling bowed low, as if held in place by centuries of deliberation. 12 figures were seated around a single curved obsidian table. They represented 5 distinct species, elders of empires, veterans of wars, minds bred and cultivated for galactic governance. And now, crammed into the forward edge of their seats, they squinted toward an outdated 2D holoscreen bolted to the far wall. Some called it a relic, others considered it tradition. One of the 12 leaned in an Avrixian with fine, segmented tendrils where a mouth would be and addressed the caller. Please confirm, you are the commanding officer of Outpost. Zeta Rho 12. Estimated civilian population 1,000. The being on screen furred, broad-shouldered, with a crest of metallic plumage indicating his rank nodded slowly. Yes, that is correct. No casualties reported. Is that still accurate? Yes, there were none. A ripple of shock darted through the council chamber. For several seconds, no one spoke. That kind of result simply did not occur, certainly not in engagements with warbands. That is without precedent, one of the council members murmured. How is that possible? What did you do? The commander fumbled for words. His talons clicked anxiously against the edge of his desk. We didn't do it. It wasn't us. Then who? The chairwoman's voice sharpened. We asked the humans for help. The room collectively stiffened. Humans? One of the elders echoed, drawing the word out as though tasting something sour. Species designation Z9, the commander clarified awkwardly. Apologies. I understand they remain officially uncontacted, but there was a brief scramble. Among the tribunal, miniature displays in front of each counselor lit up with flickering hologram summaries of known data on ZZ9. The facts were few and unimpressive, primitive, isolated, lacking even basic interstellar propulsion. Their only known venture beyond their atmosphere had been a limited lunar mission, decades ago, without any signs of subsequent expansion. Most of the data was decades old, if not outright irrelevant. One of the Gari, a long-bodied, gas-breathing being with translucent fronds, snorted audibly. You're telling us your survival, and the safety of 1,000 lives, was owed to a species that hasn't even cracked fusion drive tech? No. The commander corrected softly. Not to the species, to 4 individuals. The council chamber vibrated with murmurs. You're not making sense, a crustacean-like Dreth said, waving one heavy claw dismissively. You are under threat of annihilation. Why not evacuate? The commander's posture faltered for a moment. We tried. We sent out a distress beacon the moment we detected the fleet inbound. It was marked as an emergency priority, but we received a denial. Our request for aid was deemed too risky. The Defense Force leadership ruled that committing even a single vessel to our location was an unacceptable loss given current shortages. We were, in essence, abandoned. Tension swelled in the air like an electrical charge. Every council member tapped furiously at their console, pulling up transmission logs. The evidence was there, classified, but accessible to the 12. An emergency alert, marked dismissed. A long silence followed. Shall I continue? The commander asked, and though the words were spoken with measured patience, the tone hinted at something verging on defiance. The presiding member narrowed their eyes, but gave a slight nod. Yes, explain this trait. What makes these humans these 4 capable of what you claim? The commander inhaled slowly. They possess a cultural axiom, a saying, deeply woven into their psyche. Everything is a weapon. That's what we leveraged. We placed them in the orbital debris field above Narine, the 3rd planet in our system, and gave them access to whatever materials we could spare. A voice from the tribunal cut in sharply. Wait, you cannot simply drop aliens into an operational theater. On what basis did you select them? What steps were taken to communicate your intentions? Shame flickered behind the commander's eyes. There was no time for formality, no protocol. The team dispatched to Earth identified individuals in remote areas and attempted negotiations. Most refused. Those who panicked were sedated and returned unharmed. He shifted uncomfortably before continuing, but the crew encountered a ground vehicle, a civilian transport, carrying 4 individuals. They were receptive. They agreed. No protest? The Evrixian asked incredulously. No fear at being abducted and conscripted. They showed signs of surprise. Yes, but not alarm. The crew noted that they had previous military backgrounds, something called special forces. They adapted rapidly. Only one had to be sedated before takeoff, and that was at the insistence of the others. They were briefed during transit. Then you took them to the battlefield? Not immediately. First, we brought them to base, gave them access to any equipment we had. Our head engineer prepared a cache of items he believed might prove useful. Tools, gadgets, portable repair arrays. Most importantly, we issued them neural link circlets interfaces originally designed for our own species technicians. You what? One of the Dreth barked. Those contain privileged schematics, proprietary data. They're tailored to our neurology. You gave them to primitives? The commander met the accusation head-on. They worked. Our research indicates their brain patterns are remarkably similar to ours, at least close enough to enable basic interface compatibility. We had no choice. We were facing extinction. You violated contact law, endangered technological containment policy, and risked irreversible contamination of a developing species. We acted to survive, the commander replied, resolute. And I would do it again. Among the 4 humans, there was no confusion about leadership. One of them taller than the others, with a voice that cut through silence like a command line of code, naturally assumed control. It wasn't a matter of ego or dominance. It was precision, clarity. The others deferred to him not because of fear, but because they trusted him. You could see it in the way they moved, efficient, coordinated, as though they'd fought beside one another before. Maybe they had. We never did find out. He did not waste time with ceremonies. He simply asked, what are our assets? What's the threat profile? What's the terrain? We gave him all we had: telemetry of the incoming warband fleet, atmospheric data on Narine, layouts of the orbital debris field, long-range scans, topographical overlays, and we offered them a vessel, something reliable enough to reach the debris ring, outfitted with cargo holds for the items they chose. Weapons, we assumed, but that wasn't what they wanted. When we asked if they required additional armaments, pulse cannons, rail launchers, field mines, they declined. Not passively. They actively refused. The leader smiled and said, guns won't help. Not with what we're planning. I remember our logistics officer practically choking on his own breath at that. They took with them only what they deemed useful. Not in the way our engineers thought, of course. Their definition of useful was unlike anything we expected. And so they departed. The orbital debris field around Narine wasn't exactly a battlefield. It was a graveyard, a silent cemetery of half-functioning space hulks, gutted mining rigs, rusted civilian haulers, and a few deep space vessels abandoned by colonization projects long since canceled. A wasteland. The humans saw something different. We watched, at first curious, then bewildered, then increasingly unnerved. As they got to work, they docked with an ancient colony transport over 1.2 kilometers in length, derelict for nearly a century. No power, no atmosphere, no shields, barely any hull integrity. Any engineer worth their salt would have written it off as scrap. Within 12 hours, it was lit up. They used the neural circlets to interface with its archaic systems, bypassing degraded firmware with a kind of creative aggression that should have been impossible. We saw them rip out entire decks, yanking out propulsion modules from drifting wrecks, stitching together incompatible engine types, reconfiguring power cores from 3 different species technologies, and while they worked, they played music. That's not a metaphor. They literally broadcasted low-range subspace frequencies filled with what we now know to be Earth music. It was erratic, some kind of fast-paced percussion, intense vocalizations, sometimes slow and mournful, other times wild and energetic. Our sensors flagged it as audio contamination at first, but then we started recognizing patterns in the frequencies. They weren't just listening. They were thinking with it, building with it, harmonizing with chaos. It would have been poetic if it wasn't so deeply unsettling. When one of our analysts asked why they were playing music, the human leader replied, over the makes the job feel like a montage. They repurposed old Rift engines machines that hadn't worked in decades. They extracted volatile fuel cells and fused them with half-melted containment units. They lashed together spent reactor cores, layered redundant backups, and created something. We didn't know what. We still don't know what, not fully. They took a ruin and turned it into a weapon the likes of which we had never seen. And still, no guns, no missile bays, no plasma rays, not even a single torpedo chute. Then darkness. One morning, every sensor aimed at Nareen went dark. Not damaged, not hacked, just dead. No subspace telemetry, no visual relay, not even a whisper of magnetic field resonance. Silence. We thought the warband had arrived early, that they'd launched some kind of jamming burst, but our outer range sensors showed otherwise. The field hadn't been disabled, it had been smothered by an interference cloud so thick it disrupted even drift navigation. We had to assume the worst. The warband arrived 3 hours later, 312 ships, heavy cruisers, rift cutters, boarding vessels, shock troops. We had no defenses, no shields, no orbital cannons, nothing. We were prepared for slaughter. And then, something extraordinary happened. A signal flared bursting out from Nareen's shadow like a thunderclap. A simple message, broadcast in the universal war dialect used for surrender negotiations. The voice was human. This is your only warning. Leave, or be rendered incapable of choice. Our entire command station froze. From our observatories, we picked up sensor ghosts, dozens of energy echoes. 42, to be exact. Too clean, too consistent to be random. The warband's fleet must have seen the same, because they diverted, swarmed toward Nareen. And here's the part that makes no sense. There was only one ship, that colony transport they had repaired. It was the only actual vessel in the field. The rest were just rigged transponders, false signatures, scrap hulls lit with dummy beacons, illusions. The warband was chasing ghosts, but by the time they realized that, it was too late. The humans had done something unthinkable. They had used Nareen's own unstable atmosphere against the invaders. You see, the planet's gas storms dredged up volatile compounds, chemicals that reacted violently under electromagnetic strain. The mining project had failed because ignition was too unpredictable. The humans had weaponized that chaos. When the warband entered low orbit, a massive eruption engulfed them, gouts of flame and electromagnetic discharge swallowing entire ships. Rift engines sputtered, hulls buckled, formations scattered. But that was just the beginning. The human-modified colony ship charged in not with speed, but intent. Like a predator, its systems pulsed resonant shockwaves blooming through the cloud. We watched as dreadnoughts buckled from proximity alone. It wasn't kinetic. It wasn't energy-based. It was concussive, a type of transmission we still can't replicate. Like striking a chord that shattered hulls instead of sound barriers. And then the unthinkable happened again. The warband surrendered. It took several minutes before we even believed what we were witnessing. The warband, brutal, feared, merciless, wasn't retreating. They were stopping, one after another. Their ships flickered like candles in a windstorm, engines dead, weapons offline, movement halted. Not all at once, but steadily, until only a few remained. The debris field was quiet again. No more eruptions, no more signal ghosts. Only the single human-modified colony ship gliding silently, almost reverently, among the crippled vessels. Our own command center erupted in disbelief. No one said it aloud, but the same thought passed through everyone's mind. How? How could a single crew for beings from a world so primitive it didn't even have orbital trade routes accomplish what fleets had failed to do? And more so, survive it? When subspace communications finally returned, it came through in a burst, a transmission beamed directly to our outpost. It contained no coordinates, no encryption, no commands. It was a message. Simple, final. The human leader's voice crackled through the comms with the calm of someone who had just finished tuning a delicate instrument. Situation resolved. Debrief. Not necessary. You know where to find us. Attached was a single string of numbers foreign to us, but unmistakably a form of communication ID. We later learned it matched something called a phone number in their society, a means of direct contact on their planet. How they converted that into a signal readable across interstellar relays remains a mystery. There was also a note. Thank you for the tools. The ones that worked, we kept. The rest were interesting. At the bottom was a final sentence. There's something satisfying about a plan that actually works. That last part, none of our linguists could agree on whether it was a proverb, a joke, or a form of human sarcasm. But the tone? The tone was unmistakably proud, and then they were gone. Subspace readings showed a rift flare, one that didn't match any known propulsion sequence. Somehow, the humans had not only stabilized the massive colonial wreck they had equipped it with rift jumping capabilities far beyond anything in our own current fleet, they vanished into hyperspace, leaving behind only smoldering enemy hulls and a stunned sector. But the story didn't end there, because they didn't just disable the warband. They rescued them, over 3,000 enemy personnel, drifting in emergency pods, pleading for asylum. We recovered what we could. When asked why they hadn't finished the job, why they had spared the same forces that threatened to enslave us, the humans never replied. Not directly, but they had made it clear, in action, every tactic they used was non-lethal. Every method of attack left systems inoperable but not destroyed. They were surgical in their chaos, precise in their destruction, but they did not kill. The warband surrendered not because they were outgunned but because they were outmatched. Tactically, mentally, philosophically, they had faced an enemy who believed everything could be a weapon, including mercy, and now, we're left with 3,000 enemy soldiers, begging to stay on our planet. They've refused repatriation. Many claim to suffer from acute fear of space travel. Some have already integrated into our support systems, volunteering in our hospitals, working to repair the very systems they once sought to conquer. So, yes, we are making a formal request for supplies, food, shelter, translators, because while we may have survived the invasion, we were not prepared for its ending. No one could be. One of the tribunal's senior members finally broke the silence. Her voice was hoarse, almost whispered. And the humans? You say they survived? Yes, all four, the commander replied. They left through the rift not long after we re-established comms. Their ship, it moved like nothing I've seen before. Silent, massive, impossible. Do you think they'll come back? I don't know, the commander admitted, but I hope so. Another voice from the tribunal murmured. You said no casualties. That still applies? Yes, on both sides. Not a single confirmed death. That's why I believe we witnessed something unique. Silence again. Finally, the presiding elder spoke. Can you contact them? The commander raised the piece of paper again, the one bearing the string of Earth numbers. They told us this is how we reach them. If ever we or someone we care about is in danger again, and you trust them? I trust what I saw. I trust the outcome. And I trust the feeling they left behind. It wasn't power. It wasn't fear. It was resolve. The elder nodded. Begin preparations. Your supply request is granted. And compile everything into a report. Every detail. A moment later, the screen blinked off. The room, once humming with disbelief, fell still. None of them spoke. Not right away. Because for the first time in decades, the 12 members of the Galactic Concord sat in the weight of something that wasn't policy or war or law. It was wonder. And, somewhere, out among the stars, 4 humans drifted in a ship stitched from broken dreams, playing music through the void and waiting for the next time someone called for help.